first I will ask our southern neighbors to present their views, then I will ask Mr. Kelam to continue, and then Marko, Mihkelson, and then at the end the economist Madis Müller to summarize his views. Well, Veiko. Veiko Spolitis is a well-known scholar, and he actually has had some kind of decade-long 1999-2009 governance research on three Baltic states made in Helsinki. Yeah? And I think that from the Latvian perspective, we will be very interested in what are the views, and maybe you will reflect a bit also not only just your views as such, but also the public attitude which you are following very precisely in Latvia as well.
Thank you, Raivo, for the introductory remarks, and thank you, Erik, for a very concise presentation. In looking on the possible scenarios, which are not strategies but scenarios, which are for us to contemplate, and looking at it from the Latvian perspective, then already Erik said that there is a possibility when Estonia looks on a closer cooperation with its northern neighbors, Finns and Lithuanians, have close historic ties with Poles. So Latvia is being, throughout history, one of this centripetal forces of a Baltic unity, which you also were alluding after yesterday's conference. So therefore, from the Latvian perspective, always the Balticness has been one of the major messages, and therefore it's been always an interest of the Baltic policymakers and political and economic elites to foster deepened cooperation amongst the Baltic states. And therefore, if we look at it from the perspective of those scenarios, obviously, one thing is external constellation of forces. What are the developments in the European Union? What happens in Russia after the power change next March? How Baltic states themselves cooperate on the foreign policy issues. But even more important, and this is what is which is ongoing in Latvia today, is the Latvian internal dynamics, or the domestic policy. And here, obviously, if we speak about the Latvian developments, then over the last 3-4 years there have been a lot of achievements, because if we compare Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania from the governance point of view, then as Raivo just said, that in terms of the trust in democratic institutions, and here I mean parliament, government, judicial system, political parties, here unfortunately Estonia has gone its own way, very similar to Nordic countries, whereas Lithuania and Latvia has gone its own way. And here the trust in these democratic institutions, unfortunately, in Latvia and Lithuania is decreasing from year to year, and obviously which makes anyone to question what is the reason for that. And here, if we look at it from the Latvian perspective, and all these reforms which we starting from 2008 basically, are the reforms which were envisaged prior Latvia joining the EU, and which was in a green paper, the last green paper in 2003. And actually, it's quite interesting that if we look what is happening in Greece today, then very often we forget that actually the Greek experience of Greek accession into the EU back in 1982, actually this bad experience created a key communautaire preparation for all the successful enlargements ever since. Also, Latvian negative experience, where in the EU Green Paper it was very explicitly said that corruption is a problem, even though there was high hopes with the Corruption Prevention and Fighting Bureau established that it would solve the problems in Latvia. Unfortunately, in the EU, this was just hope, so it wasn't solved, but now the financial crisis actually helped clearing these issues as well. So the problems of corruption and state capture being solved gradually for the last 3.5 years. And looking on these scenarios, then obviously domestic policy issues are there, they must be solved. It implies also electoral law, it implies also a judicial system, also territorial administrative reform, which Latvia finished in 2009, even though it's ongoing because there's still discussion going on. But looking forward, obviously, there is no question about the strategic choice of moving into the direction, continuing into the direction of the transatlantic space, but at the same time, obviously, it's ongoing domestic debate also about reaping benefits from the prospective eastern trade. And here I believe there are certain political forces who believe that these domestic reforms and transformations which must be done could wait, and we could embrace the big Russian perspectives in a very simplistic, I would even sometimes call very blue-eyed manner, and so therefore this is kind of domestic struggle. If you look at on the parliamentary level now, with right-wing parties on one side and then Harmony Centre on the other side. So that is domestic dynamics in Latvia, which will definitely determine also the future for the court.
Thank you, Veiko. If you allow me, I will just mention that, for example, even yesterday during the conference I mentioned that I was attending in Riga, it was a kind of mixed feeling in the audience. Almost all keynote speakers, and particularly Latvian ones, were making references to Estonia as a kind of example or benchmark. At the same time, I spotted a very strong feeling in the audience that they are fed of it. This comparison to Estonia all the time, and I got even applause when I stated that I'm the last Estonian speaking here in front of you, and everybody was really feeling relief after that. Indeed, they applauded. It's funny enough to say that in a certain extent we should be very cautious about comparison. As I said, they are very much similar trends here, but some elements are definitely different, and for that purpose I would ask to continue Associated Professor Mr. Gintaras Aleknonis from Mihkelson Romeris University in Vilnius. What is the Lithuanian perspective? Please.
Thank you. Of course, I'm not sure that I can speak about Lithuania, maybe my personal thoughts about this, because as Lithuanian and speaking a Southerner, it's strange for me, but what to do in such a company? As I'm always sitting on two chairs, on journalistic chair and a political analysis chair, so I'll try to speak a few words from both chairs. So the first is perspectives. Yesterday in the morning I was walking around Tallinn and found two interesting things about perspectives. One is, I saw this history path in History Museum, where the most important dates of Estonian history are on different stones. And the most interesting thing was the last stone, which dates 2418. And it's written what? That it will be 500th anniversary of Estonian Republic. So I was surprised with your perspective, and I think it's a very strong message. It's a strong message for European Union, and another thing, it's a strong message to the office which is next door to this building. You know what is office? What is this office? The second, about this perspective, I was impressed by this, and I thought, as yesterday we were speaking, that there are very different attitudes, and that Estonians are more optimistic than Lithuanians or Latvians, and I don't know if I'm true or not, maybe it's more for sociologists to clear up, but I think that when we are speaking about future, Estonians more are speaking about opportunities, and Lithuanians more about dangers, what is waiting for us. Of course, this is interconnected, but maybe it gives for understanding of the future. Another thing what I mentioned yesterday walking in Tallinn, in the window of one souvenir shop, I saw Matryoshka. You know, he's more than Matryoshka with some faces of politicians. And so there were 3 Matryoshkas, one with Obama, another with Putin, and the third was Tallinn. The same size, only prices different. So it was very interesting for me to judge what are the prices. So which was the most expensive?
Putin.
Putin. Other suggestions? Tallinn. Obama. So Obama and Putin were 24 euros, and Tallinn 15. 24. So you see, and of course, for me it would be. I would like to see here also Merkel, Matryoshka, just for prices to compare. And so we had to compare, and then I thought about these future scenarios. It was very nice words that we are to look for cheapest way of cooperation. And I think that these Matryoshkas shows which is the cheapest way and maybe where we can achieve a lot. And so, finishing this journalistic part, now I'm going to this political part. I counted sitting here, not scenarios, but 5 formulas of Baltic cooperation. B3, from my point of view, my personal view, it's already missed time for this B3. There were chances 20 years ago to create B3, some sort of Benelux in this time, but I think it was natural that we missed this chance because we had to look for future and to look for different ways, and it was very good that we missed. Of course, some nostalgia maybe left. The second, which was also mentioned, formula was NB6. From my point of view, for nowadays, this is the most respected formula. The third formula, NB8, which was also mentioned here. Of course, there is some interconnection between NB6 and NB8. It could be changed because of status and connections of Iceland and Norway within the European Union, but these are connected. Another formula is NB8 plus 2. I mean Germany plus Germany and Poland. In this case, I have some doubts because the best cooperation is always about cooperation between some sorts which are more equal. And these 2 players are a bit different, of a different strength, and then there is always question of leadership in every future and every integration. And then when there is NB8 or NB6 plus 2, then there is question of leadership, and I think the Nordic countries already showed that here model of leadership is very democratic and very interesting, and in many cases, from my point of view, maybe the best. And the fifth formula is NB8 plus 2 plus 1. This is Russia. I think this is the most problematic, because in this case we have democratic countries and one dictatorship, and this is a very complicated thing because if we compare from human rights, from media freedom, it's different questions, and in many cases we can speak about economic things, but we always must remember some context, and this cooperation will never be honest. for the nearest future. And going to the end of my ideas, I want only to stress that cooperation can't be an aim. It's always only a tool for national governments or national states to achieve something. And of course, it's always good to play some games, but it's only a tool, and we must. And how this tool will be used, this will be the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting perspective you brought up with the formulas, and you know, when you speak as a journalist, from a journalist perspective, you talk about not only Matryoshka, but also about this dangers or opportunities attitude. Actually, the Chinese hieroglyph for crisis is danger and opportunity.
It's the important thing how to make from.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I'm asking Mr. Tunne Kelam, very well known, one of the leaders of Liberation Times, and for a long time also a member of the European Parliament, Tunne Kelam, to put it into the whole European perspective, how it looks, this Baltic cooperation and possible scenarios of development from all the European perspective. Thank you very much.
Our Lithuanian colleague just mentioned that the B3 option was missed 20 years ago. And as we've experienced, trying to get into the European Union and NATO, there was an intense rivalry between all candidate members. And I think the solution 7 years ago almost was a right one, the big bang solution, taking in all that could be taken. That's a bit problematic about Bulgaria and Romania, but still, I think this is a best option. Now, what is going to happen is one question. What can we do that is possibilities in crisis times? That's another question. And this reminds me of Max Jakobson, who in his book about 21st century wrote that we can anticipate everything. But one thing is absolutely certain. Something absolutely unexpected is going to happen. Always. So this will be part of any future scenario. Now I'm going to speak about Baltic Sea strategy because it's a symbol of the regional cooperation. And in this context, it seems that only the first scenario, the European scenario, is viable. Because the original idea of the Baltic Sea strategy, this has been generated by the European Parliament with Thomas Henrik Gilbers making the first draft, and then the recent Finnish Foreign Minister Stubb taking over. And we managed to accomplish it in an amazing speed for European dimensions. In 5 years, it had been introduced into practice on state level. But this strategy was designed to make the region the most dynamic, the most innovative region in the European Union, taking the lead. And I think this is still possible. Even the crisis situation in South is making our positions better. The question is, what are we going to do? Because the strategy as such, and it has been focused from the beginning on some 4 or 5 priority areas. Of course, the environmental condition of the Baltic Sea is one. This is very, very clear. but second, transportation systems around the Baltic Sea, connecting this area to the heart of Europe. Then energy systems, connecting energy systems. And then science, research and development, and higher education, including also the idea of a international level Baltic University. So it makes sense to intensify regional cooperation. And what about the second scenario? I would say we should be here maybe flexible, because in the present conditions, where Europe is clearly tending to split into one speed and then second speed Europe, it would make sense practically to strengthen the regional cooperation, but not opposing it necessarily as much as possible to the general trends of Europe. Because I was elected 7 years ago to the European Parliament with a slogan defending Estonian national interests in Brussels. And then it came out that there was almost nothing to fight for, because our national interests were provided by our treaties. So we got enough money. The question is how to use it meaningfully. And the second conclusion is that our national interests are best covered by united common European policies. Common foreign and security policy, common energy solidarity policy, the basic principles of the European Union. And here is a big difference between big powers and smaller member states. Now, the Baltic Sea strategy has huge potentials. Still, having reached now the fourth stage of it, the first was in the European Parliament, the second was selling it to the Commission. We managed to do it in 1 year time, beginning with Barroso. The third most complicated stage was to selling it to the member states. I expected very much that Estonia could have taken lead in introducing it some years ago. It was not the case. Finally, Swedes took over, and now we have reached the fourth stage. And this is, of course, by necessity, the most complicated one, because there are almost 20 priority areas. They have been distributed between 8 member states around the Baltic Sea. And what we are lacking and are worrying about is, once again, the better cooperation between 8 states and even between ministries and institutions of each single member state. Often these priority areas tend to become sort of shopping lists in the national interests, whereas the meaning and point of the Baltic strategy is to create synergy and to solve the regional problems. It is still an open question. And one of the ideas which we have developed is maybe providing better cooperation through rotating presidency of the Baltic Sea strategy. For example, each of the 8 member states around the Baltic Sea taking lead and responsibility for half a year or for 1 year. Anyway, we need much better cooperation. And the most problematic area is really connections between member states' governments and interinstitutional connections. It was mentioned one problem to include to this future cooperation northwestern part of Russia. From the beginning, just to make it clear, the Baltic strategy was designed as separate from Northern Dimension, which was supposed to link Russia through Finland with the European Union. I think we need to keep these two dimensions separate. Baltic Sea strategy is the EU internal strategy, not excluding, of course, neighborhood policies and cross-border cooperation. But as for including Russia, I think Veiko mentioned the blue-eyed approach is still dominant in Europe, but in this case, of course, Russia should become really democratic, which is not yet the case. And finally, I think that just in present turbulence, the Baltic Sea region has a very good perspective to be used, because we see that in Southern Europe it's almost impossible to cut expenditure, even if it's obviously needed to cut. The Baltic states have shown that it is necessary, it is possible, and so not only the Baltic Sea strategy has become a model strategy, because other regional strategies are following suit, like Danube basin strategy, and something from Mediterranean basin, but also that we can survive and we can accommodate to the changing conditions, which are not going to change very, very soon. We have to be prepared for a long, quite a long turbulence, depression, and the states who are better prepared for this will certainly gain also in authority. And finally, what could be the contribution of 3 Baltic states to Europe? I think it is our knowledge and embodiment of the basic principles of Europe. Being in Europe, you also see how the unity and common policies have been violated just by the big member states. And you can see in the European Parliament how the big delegations are staggering under the burden of their national interests, quite contrary to the European interests. And in that occasions, often it's a chance of a small powers just to remind about solidarity, about common policies, about the basic principles of Europe, which are going to stay the same, whatever will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was indeed very interesting insight to the logic of the contribution which we can make on the whole European scale. And this distinction of 2 strategies actually in the region is also very important. But let me ask now, as the latter one was related to the issue of Russia, and whether we like it or not, but we have to talk about Russia in the context of Baltic region one way or another anyway. So basically I would ask now Marko Mihkelson a bit to elaborate this issue, as he has been as a journalist in the turbulent times in Russia, right? Russia, actually publishing this book about Russia. And now also as a prominent parliamentarian and chairman of the Foreign Commission. So Marko, maybe you will take this Russian angle to the regional issues and elaborate.
Okay, thank you. Raivo, you asked me to be nice guy. If I may, just a couple of comments on those scenarios that Erik put up with his colleagues. I think so. The question about be free, both as a letter and a number, or in English, be free. I think this was naturally the process which was at the level of cooperation at the very end of the 80s and the very early 90s. And obviously this is gone because of much more different and multi-layer cooperation for all the states we are included into the much wider and much more the wider cooperation with our natural, let's say, allies, both in close proximity, but also in Europe or in case of NATO as well. I think so. We have to take this into account. And secondly, I think so. This is the idea of let's say a much wider and bigger cooperation among Baltic Sea states, especially when we're talking about Nordic dimension here. This is not in contradictory to this the more bigger cooperation between three Baltic states themselves. So I think that my small experience in politics during the last 9 years tells that actually the biggest change that happened in the region was the EU enlargement in 2004, which actually paved the way for real cooperation on very different levels with participants, with Nordic countries, Nordic Baltic countries. And I think the formula NB8 probably is one of the most sort of interesting working formulas which has been in place for some time. And I find always, I meet twice a year my colleagues from foreign affairs, chairmen of foreign affairs committees from all 8 countries. Actually, this is very unique platform where we're working, we're discussing all different issues about world politics, and actually we find very, very often very often common position, and very rarely our position distinguished. But saying that, I think so. Coming to Raivo, to your question about the role of Russia, I would say that if we look into history, I mean, last 20 years, we have seen that Russia has played extremely positive role for Baltic cooperation. Why I'm saying so, that Russia has played a positive role is that we all basically have less alternatives to that rather than to cooperate. It was very clear at the very beginning of regaining independence, early 90s. It was very clear when we all worked together to get rid of Russian armed forces from our countries, early 90s, and also the Russian economic pressure on us pushed us much more and much quicker to consolidate, actually, or integrate our own economies during the 90s, and also to look towards Europe. And I think so the success in terms of integration to Europe was in some way also thanks to Russian foreign policy. In this regard, I think so Russia has been a great mobilizator in terms of cooperation between three Baltic countries. This doesn't mean, obviously, that there has not been different moments. So let's say the moments in all three Baltic states when we have seen that Russia has tried to sort of influence internally the decision-making process. We have had scandals in Lithuania, we had some scandals in Latvia, and also in Estonia, if we remember just 1.5 year, or even 1 year ago, what scandal broke out here in Estonia. But since all what has happened up to this moment, and the easier place for Russia to really be in the region, in real terms, let's say, the positive partner and integrator, then I think there are a few trends which actually showing us here in Estonia that last 1.5 years we have had relatively less emotional period in our relations, and relatively good numbers in our economic relations relations. This year, export-import is up 60-70% with Russia. The tourism is growing. And these are, let's say, quite good numbers in terms that maybe there could be some sustainable shift in the longer run. But what worries me actually is, and then what makes me be very, let's say, suspicious about the idea that the northwestern part of Russia could be much more and well integrated into, let's say, Nordic-Baltic cooperation is not what is going on in actually this northern western region. We see the extremely interesting opportunities actually, which is, again, thanks to European Union, is going on between Estonia, Latvia and Russia in cross-border cooperation. Actually, if you speak to people in our southeastern borders, then they are probably the most, they're telling that this period of time is most interesting from all last 20 years, and opportunities are there, but to really make a paradigmatic change, it very much depends what is going on at central power level in Moscow. And as we all know, Russia is now entering into the period of elections, both state-term elections just a week from now on 4th of December, and on 4th of March they're going to have presidential elections. I think so in this case Max Jakobsen's words are not in place. Most likely we see no big surprises in terms of who's going to win in parliamentary elections and who's going to win in presidential elections. And we can project, obviously, that this might create possibility that the current system with some modification can be in place for next 10 to 12 years, while the president can be now re-elected for another 6 years after a 6 years term. So, but I'm not so sure that this would be the case. But anyway, what we see in terms of what will happen just in a few days' time from now is that Russia will join WTO. This is obviously very good news in terms that Russia has been knocking on this door last 18 years, and partly because they weren't ready, partly because WTO organization wasn't ready to bring Russia in. Now we reaching this the moment. Obviously, this will allow much more it will give new tools to frame business contacts between, let's say, Europe and Russia, and maybe allows to restart to more in better way to renegotiate the European Union-Russian partnership agreement. But still, I think that this is just one tool. We should not overestimate the results of that. I think so much more important at this particular moment for our region, especially also to see what is going on in let's say, foreign policy thinking around these elections, but beyond that as well. And this is something we don't, I see right now is not put enough focus on. Yes, as I mentioned, even between Estonia and Russia, trade opportunities are much wider today than they were 2 years ago. But at the same time, on a very high political level, Estonia has given many signals to our Russian counterparts to open up the dialogue on the issues which are pending at the moment. But the answers from Moscow have been relatively icy, let's say, or very mute during last couple of years, let's say. What we see the televised addresses by the Russian president just a couple of days ago. We heard from the same president that the war against Georgia was just to time said publicly by Russian president. There is the first major speech that Putin gave after the semi-nomination to be presidential candidate. He talked about Eurasian Union, and I think here is much bigger geopolitical games going on, unfortunately, again, which will influence and direct also possible opportunities, let's say, in terms of cooperation in this area. But again, saying this, Russia is missing huge opportunities to benefit actually much more from cooperation with its Western neighbors. But at the same time, they pushing us again, the Baltic states particularly, to put finally the energy, the common energy, let's say, the political will, in order to really complete those major tasks that we have ahead of us, which is energy security, and which are very important infrastructural projects, which will unite us much more and much stronger with our Western allies.
Thank you very much, Marko. And now I would ask Madis Müller, who has a rather long-standing career already with the system of the World Bank, and now who has been appointed as the Deputy Governor of Estonian Central Bank, to elaborate a bit the economic aspects related to the Baltic cooperation issue and regional cooperation issue. Madis, please.
Thank you, Raivo. So let me try to make a few introductory comments from the economic point of view on those possible scenarios and in general about the Baltic cooperation. You already referred to the rivalry that has been between the three Baltic countries. But if we first take a step back and look in terms of think in terms of economy, or economies of the three countries, of course, there's just so many similarities. We are all small economies, we're small countries, very open in terms of our economic policies. We share a very similar recent history. Now, from the central banker's perspective, the monetary policy and the exchange rate policies have been similar in terms of having a fixed effectively exchange rate, even though Estonia now is the one in the Eurozone, but the principle is really the same in all three countries. The economies are also relatively flexible if you compare the Baltic countries to the bigger European countries, and that of course comes with the size partly. And we're also very, very integrated in terms of the financial sector, especially with the Nordic countries. So all that has led to very similar growth dynamics in the past years before the crisis, and of course the 08-09 crisis hit all three countries very hard, but also the jump back from the bottom was very, very similar. Nevertheless, there of course are differences. And now looking at and thinking of the last crisis and what mattered for the three countries, then I guess it's fair to say that Estonia has historically had a more conservative fiscal policy. As a result of that, was perhaps better prepared for the crisis, thanks to the bigger fiscal or financial buffers that the government had been able to build. On the other hand, Lithuania was less dependent on the inflow of foreign capital and lending from the Scandinavian countries, and in that sense, Lithuania was really better prepared to a possible stop in the flow of foreign funding, and was sort of less vulnerable in the crisis. And the difference in case of Latvia that is worth pointing out is that when you look at the financial sector, in 2009 it was already 98% of the banking sector that was basically controlled by the foreign banks. And you could say it's bad or good, but it's a matter of fact that it actually helped Estonia to cope with the crisis, and the Scandinavian banks sort of had to take in many of the losses effectively outside from the Estonian. But in the case of Latvia, for example, the foreign ownership in the banking sector was around 65%, so still high, but much less. Now coming to those three scenarios, then I think I'm an optimist in general, but perhaps the first scenario that implies a very smooth solution to the current economic problems in Europe and the Eurozone, and sort of the rosiest out of the three scenarios is perhaps a bit too optimistic. But I think the combination of maybe the first and the second sounds most reasonable to me, which would imply that the Eurozone, of course, will still remain intact. Of course, there will have to be some changes in the way that the European economies are managed at the level of cooperation of economic policies between the European countries. But of course, there's a cost to this crisis, and the economic growth in Europe will most likely be relatively low in the next years, and that, of course, also has implications for the Baltic countries. Now, I agree with what was mentioned in the report and also by previous speakers, which is that it's hard to think of the Baltic cooperation as necessarily a goal by itself. I think we're all rational people and we respond to incentives. And the same applies to, of course, politicians and also business community. So you, of course, you cooperate to the extent that it makes sense. But I also think that it just simply makes a lot of sense to still cooperate to a very large extent between the Baltic countries, and that is basically just because of the small size of all three economies, and the fact that as a joint area we of course form a much bigger market, and it makes sense to trade between ourselves, not only aim at markets much further away. And it also, the incentives are different in different sectors. The infrastructure sector was referred to previously, and I think this is a place where you would think that there are the strongest incentives to cooperate, and I think it would make a lot of sense to try to do that to the extent possible. Now, I was also asked to comment in the context of the crisis and what in Europe today, what could be the implication of that to the Baltic economies and those scenarios. So just to say that one thing that I'm concerned about when thinking of the implications on economic policies more broadly, what's happening in Europe today, is that you see there's a tendency of perhaps get back to more protectionist policies in times like this. Although one of the most important principles of the European Union, of course, is the joint market and the open movement, free movement of capital and labor and free trade. That you see, for example, in the financial sector last week, even the problems in the banking sector, the Austrian financial supervisor basically told the Austrian banks to stop expanding in these European countries and to focus more on their home and reduce the risks in Eastern Europe. So this is, in a way, it is a little bit of a protectionist attitude. But of course, it makes a lot of sense from the Austrian banking perspective. It has implications that go beyond that. And speaking of the Eurozone and from more of a central banker's perspective again, then I think it's fair to say that although it's Estonia now that joined Eurozone first, we have a very similar history also in that sense that we all three countries are used to managing their economies under a fixed exchange rate and just joining the Eurozone as a result of that is simply, to me, a very natural extension of the policies that we all have run already for years. Just being actually in the Eurozone means that you go one step further in the level of integration, and you get rid of the exchange rate risk that is important to many investors. And purely from the financial sector perspective, you are able to support your financial sector better at the times of crisis, because you can provide liquidity to the banks. Today in Estonia that was not possible in the past. But at the end, we're also not that different from that perspective. I think it just makes a lot of sense to keep cooperating. Thank you.
Thank you, Maris. Actually, during yesterday's conference, the governor of Latvian Central Bank, Mr. Mihkelson, put forward an argument in favor of euro. There is a discussion about the euro crisis and now, validity of entering Eurozone, which is declared the aim for Latvia, and Prime Minister made it also clear in the conference that they are going for that by 2014. But anyway, the calculations made by the Central Bank of Latvia have shown that at the present already they are losing about, because of the price of the money only, because of they haven't joined the euro, they are losing about 1 billion euros in decade. So 100 million euros each and every year, just because of the difference in price of money. And it's at the present. It might be even worse if the crisis escalates, by the way, but not better. So it's a substantial input which is brought by this joint currency despite all the problems. But now I'm opening the floor for panelists to make suggestions and ideas about what has been said by others, and maybe some additional remarks they want to make, and then I will turn to the audience and ask them to make questions. So, but first I will ask Erik to comment.
Very interesting discussion and very interesting feedback for me. But maybe there was one such an intriguing question for me. When I think about arguments from politicians about these scenarios, when I understand that there is some difference in the way of thinking, I want to emphasize that these scenarios are not normative constants. But it's not the shopping list that it's very important. We want to prefer number one or number two or number three. For our process, it was very clear that number one is much more promising and number three is less promising and so on. And it's not very interesting for this scenario exercise. But the question is not that we want to be happen, but maybe happen and how to react in this situation. And I think that this definition by Tunne Kelam, not definition, but he was citing Max Jakobson is very much in the context of this our discussion and in this scenario thinking. I think that it's quite normal, for example, to take the Baltic Sea strategy ideology and think that if there will be problems with the European Union, then is it possible to take these ideas and put into other context, into context of such a Nordic-Baltic cooperation, or when there was argument that there is a time is past for being free cooperation, it's meaningless cooperation in good situation, but there is some possibilities that, let's say, 90s back. For example, big problems with European Union, and then our problem was that are well something that we need to revitalize from this situation. And I think that for politicians it's a little bit our logic, but they are trying to work out some kind of model, very clear but understandable model, when to signalize about this model, to press on this model, and this model will be some kind of symbol. And it's probably working in political life well. In scenario work, it's a little bit tough, I think. Different variants are possible, and we're just trying to prepare ourselves if there will be such a type of context, when which type of behavior is maybe give results. It's my first comment.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from panelists? Yes, Marko, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think so if 90s come back, then we are in deep trouble. And there won't help the cooperation only between three Baltic countries. If we only think about economy, yes, but obviously about security policy we cannot foresee the future. I think so. What I wanted to say before as well, I think so the key question is obviously at the moment what is going on in Europe and what is the future of European Union. The Nordic countries, Baltic countries altogether are too small to change bigger picture. Yes, we can use our internal mobility, let's say, in this region, and we should break down existing walls between especially the Nordic countries and Baltic countries which are existing. We have to cooperate more in the defense area, for instance, to create Nordic defense identity. But the question is obviously that which is much more important is the Baltic Sea strategy or Baltic-Nordic cooperation will be in big trouble in terms if something seriously going wrong with European Union, and there are many Jakobsons like unknowns ahead of us. But one more point I would like to bring in, I think so this is a little bit sort of seems that it has no connection with this discussion we have at the moment, but I think that generally speaking, what is going on in the world is turning towards the sunrise. And certainly, whatever we do in the near future, Europe will have to deal with its own mess for quite a long time, and economic growth numbers will be very, very, very small, if any of those. At the same time, obviously, Asia Pacific is growing enormously, and this is not only about China. It's about economic, strategic, security interests, and the major questions will be solved in the near future already, in terms of interest of that region first, and then secondly, what's going on in this part of the world. So I think that as we Baltic countries are rather close to Asia, and in many ways, we used to say about the bridge between Europe and Russia. Why not to say that we could be somehow also a bridge between Europe and Asia? We are, together with Finland, the closest nations, actually, European nations to Asia. In many ways, the one is the link via air. But I think so. What is interesting, what puts me to think more and more to opportunities, what will give us. For instance, when we're talking about 20 beyond 20, what will happen with global transportation, in global transportation, and this opportunity which will give the opening up of Arctic Sea for commercial trade between Asia and Northern America or Europe. The Northern Passageway will be certainly most important, most interesting also for the Baltic countries, especially for Latvia and Estonia with its ports. So I think we should also include to this discussion the question of the role of Asia and opportunities there for our region.
Thank you. Actually, I think that you're right. The shift of the centrum, in the global centrum of economic power, first of all, but also political influence to the Pacific Basin was actually predicted already long ago. The question is that the present crisis have enhanced or speeded up this process very much, and let's say in 4 years of the permanent crisis, I would say that at least decade was gained by Asian hemisphere, basically getting the positions predicted. Let's say in 15 years from now, they are already almost there. So basically, it's true, and it would be worthwhile not to limit ourselves only to the European scenery, and also have a global view of how to deal with these challenges on global level, and maybe be part of the let's say wider politics and wider trade and economical cooperation with the Asian countries. But we probably just, again, my maybe personal opinion is that we can't make it by our own only. We have to collaborate not only between three Baltics, but be part of the broader Scandinavian scope, actually. And this is the challenge and possibility for us. Veiko and then Tunne.
Yes, what Marko said, I wanted to continue in the same line, because the one thing is, when we made the scenarios, we took ceteris paribus, and cooperation is there. So there is no question. We are monoxidous powers in economic terms. We have to get everything what is around us. We are too small. So the only way we can make ourselves heard is while cooperating, and then cooperating on the Be-Free framework, or to do it in an N8 or EU style. So that's why we made those three scenarios. But continuing on the same line what Marko just said, indeed, it's already in the first scenario, there is idea about the possible new routes open through the northern seas. But at the same time, if we look on the Asia, and why Asia is so good, why the Asian style of capitalism, Singapore and China, is so a lot more efficient than the Western style of capitalism, is because its state structures are governed in a very efficient way. And here, I would say that Estonia is an example for the Latvia and Lithuania, and this is what is the domestic work for Latvia and Lithuania.
So we are Asians of Baltics.
In a way, yes. So in terms of the governance, in terms of public administration, Estonians have gone further. Obviously, there are also, if we want to take it historically, then the Luxembourg summit of 1997 also determines that, because Latvia and Lithuania joined in Helsinki 2 years later. So it gave 2 years of leeway. But most important is, if your state structure is working like a clockwork, then you can also expand your cooperation on a smaller or bigger regional level, because regions are not going to be governed by some God's will. It still must be governed from the state governments, and if governments are properly working and efficient, then it can work also on a regional level.
Thank you. Tunne?
Yes, I quite agree about the importance of Asian connection, and why not the three Baltic states could become bridgeheads for Asian trade. But this, once again, needs intergovernmental and regional cooperation and long-term strategic planning, which has been the weaker side of our European experience. Because once again, the first scenario is a logical one, because we are officially members of the European Union. At the same time, it's not enough just to predict or observe what is happening in the heart of Europe or in southern Europe, because we are full members now. We have our active part to play, not to react, but to prevent, to be trying to be at least in our ideas ahead of the developments and work out different scenarios. But the main thing is that we could streamline our governments and the institutional cooperation. I think there are huge chances what have not been used. And Of course, on the other hand, Europe has lost much credibility in the outside world. We can make our contribution to strengthen this credibility and show some positive examples. Very important is cross-border cooperation, of course. And for this, we also need to strengthen our realistic approach to our neighbors. There's been a huge effort for the past 2 or 3 years, supported by Arab revolutions, that European policies should be more coordinated and should be more value-based. The idea would be some sort of balance between values and pragmatic interests, which will always be there. But this has not been achieved. At least I was last month in Wrocław in an energy conference, and Energy Commissioner Oettinger stated there that the basic goal of Russia is to split Europe. I think this has been some very important progress if a German commissioner realizes this. And this doesn't mean that we should be hostile to Russia or make obstacles to Russian trade, but the basis should be balanced, transparent, and all partners following the rules. That's it. So the big question which we need to be solved in future cooperation with Russia is Kaliningrad area. The clear vestige of Cold War, abnormal entity. And already 20 years ago, plans had been advanced to make Kaliningrad a free trade area, and so connected more naturally and economically to the rest of Europe. Russian government, unfortunately, has opposed it all the time, but the need is still there.
Thank you. Any other comments from parents? No? The audience, any questions? Any comments? Looks like not very much. Well, I have one question about what was touched upon a bit right now at the end by Tunne about the Kaliningrad region. Apparently, we do not consider this Baltic cooperation in general very much in connection with Kaliningrad region as such at all. Look, even with Erik, with all due respect and Veiko, your work, you have also concentrated on Baltic states as such, and you have only briefly touched this Kaliningrad transit and attachment to the Lithuanian, first of all, territory and what comes up in general. So basically, Kaliningrad it apparently somehow is excluded from this Baltic perspective. I do not consider it as a viable thing because Kaliningrad, whether even being actually a mothership of Russian military in the heart of Europe, is not actually excludable because it is there. It is there and will be there one way or another. Even with all kind of how to say economical solutions over this region, I mean Kaliningrad Oblast, still there will be a military presence, still it will be considered as a strategic asset from Russian perspective, and we can't help it. So basically, and it might get even worse if Iskanders will be installed and whatever happens further on the process. So why we are not talking about Kaliningrad? We are even talking about northwest in general. We're talking about St. Petersburg, but we're not talking about Kaliningrad.
Why not Kaliningrad is because we are really dependent on the goodwill of the lords of Kaliningrad region, which sit in Moscow. I remember myself when I rather foolishly, about 10 years ago, I got a visa to Kaliningrad, and with that visa, then later on I thought I have some business in Scotland on the border with Estonia and Russia. Border guard said, no, with Kaliningrad visa you cannot go to the Russian proper. So the thing is that when Russians will have different designs and when they will allow Kaliningrad to be included in that region, I think whenever there will be free money, and I know Lithuania and Poland is already doing many things in Kaliningrad, But also, for example, for the Latvian Foreign Ministry, it took almost 8 years of hard labor to get its consulate opened in Kaliningrad. I mean, it's such a problematic issue that it very much depends on Russia. When Russia will be more welcoming to include Kaliningrad in 3 Baltic states and Vare EU cooperation, that's it. It will be it.
Okay, and you want also to add something?
Just a few words about Kaliningrad. A few days ago, it was a conference in Vilnius, and one presenter was speaking about media freedom in Russia. And he presented such a map, which was strange for me. It was called Russian Karta Glasnost. So all the regions of Russia are also selected. Of course, there are no free regions, but there are also some are red, some are green, and so on. And so Kaliningrad region was on the, as I remember, on the west, in the west position in Russia, according to Russian times. There are a lot of such regions. So I think it's also some sort of problem, of regional problem. And so we are meeting this problem as well.
Obviously, Lithuania is very heavily in contact with Kaliningrad anyway, and grassroots trade is going on all the time and so on. But again, my suggestion would be that probably, most likely, the major problem is not lying with laws in Moscow, because St. Petersburg laws are also in Moscow now, and as we know, and it doesn't mean that St. Petersburg is not in good position, vice versa. So I think that there is this military aspect, strategic or geopolitical military aspect, which has been preventing Kaliningrad from development into the western gates of Russia, because it's still considered very much as a military installation first of all, and then long way to go, and then some economical reason behind. So this is something which is actually also a very important question indeed for the future of the Baltic region in general. If you want some comments?
No.
Okay, please. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much. George Poznański, Ambassador of Poland in Estonia. And as you touched upon the issue of Kaliningrad, let me allow one comment. What we, as Poland, did, it was a huge effort to get the small border movement with Kaliningrad extended. And we achieved this state where people of Kaliningrad itself, the city of Kaliningrad, will be able to travel without visa to Gdańsk, Olsztyn, and other big cities. And I think this is the best way to allow people of Kaliningrad to speak themselves how much cooperation with the European Union, how much economic links, how much cultural links they want, and decide how much they will have. So this is, let's say, our way. And one question I would say in general to the panelists, because first of all, thank you very much for this fantastic conference. But when talking about the Balticness or the approach of all Baltic states, and to make sure, of course, being representative of Poland, when we talk about Baltic side, I put together all the Nordic Baltic states and also Poland and Germany, and also Russia is also Baltic Sea. But when we talk about the approaches to the crisis, the possibilities of closing economies, closing societies in reaction to the crisis, for example. I think that here in the region, which is really based on these ideas of the free movement, there are still barriers, as Mihkelson was saying, to be removed, but the ideas are there. The free movement, the deeper internal market in the European Union, having also quite a good mosaic of countries, NATO countries, EU countries, Eurozone countries. My impression is that we are kind of in the region, we are waiting what will happen in the Europe, two-speed Europe, etc. And why the region couldn't, and in my opinion, it should create its own vision and to have its own voice in the European discussion today. Because I think here in this region, in the Baltic region, we have something to say in this overall European discussion. If you could reflect on that.
Thank you. Any comments, Veiko?
Second, Mr. Ambassador, if we read second scenario, this is in a way the way of approach, that if the Eurozone goes badly, if there is a two-speed Europe and it becomes more and more concrete, then this is one of the ways. At least in Scandinavia, there is Mr. Westerberg, which has created a lot of discussions in Scandinavian capitals, speaking about Scandinavian Federation of 25 million people, which does exclude actually the Baltic states, but still, this is one way of approaching it and looking it through this Nordic-Baltic cooperation as a viable alternative. But at the same time, I believe it shouldn't stay only this way, because also at least the Brits, David Cameron has shown a considerable interest about such a Nordic cooperation. So, plus Belgium and Holland. So, I mean, there are many opportunities, and I want to underline again, as Erik said, that those are not something concrete. Those are something to talk about and to contemplate about. But there is certainly an opportunity. But if we speak about the possibility on having own say in EU about the different way of moving somewhere, then it certainly must be coordinated between Berlin and the capitals in this region, which is a big challenge, because there will always be others which will understand that this is breaking the European Union apart. We know it from a history that whenever you speak about the integration, then someone who is trying to split is considered as a black sheep. So I don't know how to move it diplomatically.
Well, so actually I spotted also the sense that there is a Pax Germanica coming, and for that reason we have to multi-vectorize our gratitude here in the Baltic region. Marko first, then Tunne.
Yeah, very quickly to Ambassador, I think so the three Baltic states cannot succeed at all without very good relations, I mean, and a very focused relation in terms of different infrastructure projects with Poland. This is obvious. And I think that, but also that just giving example of very good cooperation on the level of parliamentarians, at least, to see that 3+1 is working, for instance, on the level of EU Affairs Committee chairpersons meeting already for years, and actually we had extremely good exchanges of views on that level, three Baltic states and Poland.
Thank you, Tunne.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. I'm very much relieved by your reaction, because it's exactly the same. Not to wait for and react, but just to make something in our own area. And these efforts and initiatives can never be seen as opposite to the European interests, because in the Baltic Sea area is a sort of model of Europe. It was just mentioned. There are Eurozone members and not Eurozone members, NATO members and no NATO members, and so on. So it's a possibility to be taken use of. And our problem has actually been to get on board bigger member states like Poland and Germany. With Polish presidency, you sent a very, very encouraging signal. You were prepared also for the Baltic Sea strategy, and the way how Polish presidency was prepared, creating his club of friends of Polish presidency and so on, and consulting and informing us, I think this was exemplary. So I'd like to thank you. And we do have difficulties with Germany, because German interest is going naturally on some other directions, but to get Germany on board fully to cooperate in this area, I think it should provide for this vital connection from Baltic Sea area to the heart of Europe.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? No, I don't see any. So let me conclude the panel which we had here. Very good panel in my opinion, and I very much thank all our participants in participating and presenting their views and suggestions. If I try to summarize these conclusions, we agreed that the rest of the Baltic conference will be summarized by Trilli Velis later on, but on my panel I will make some summary. Potential of integration is related to execution of Baltic Sea strategy, if it succeeds. It is related to EU, to the strength of EU, and it is one way or another still touched or in touch with the Northwest Russian issue one way or another. Involvement of broader participant list and first of all the leading players in the scenery is the question how to do it. And if we look at the three scenarios, what struck me was that one scenario was actually coherent development scenario. Two of them were actually counter projects. Look at the logic of this scenario setup. Yeah, we have one coherent development scenario and even more counter scenarios, counter projects. So basically, it means that we do anticipate some problems ahead, and therefore we have to prepare ourselves for that. But anyway, even the counter scenario, the counter project of three Baltic states themselves, the third one, still required a lot of common effort and development, and even in some extent even more deeper one than in other cases. So basically we can't live without each other. One general conclusion out of this discussion is that in general we try to avoid to become periphery of Europe. Instead of that, we can be even a model for such kind of development like it is occurring right now. And to avoid to become a periphery, we have to stick together, we have to have a common effort for that. And Estonia obviously can play a constructive role as one of the facilitators of this process, and having some experience in time, just a couple of years ahead of our neighbors. Sometimes we have an advantage of providing our experience as a learning lesson or case study, how to avoid mistakes first of all, and how to make right choices. But anyway, cooperation is not a tool; it's just tool, not an aim. This is a very important thing. It tends to be a kind of tradition for the last 20 years that we're talking about. Cooperation as aim by itself, but it's not actually. And crisis is obvious. Crisis is long-lasting one way or another. Tough times are not just past but ahead, and we have to utilize it in the best Chinese way. Unfortunately, it was made very clear that this possibility to become a kind of Baltic Benelux is over in time, and instead of that, the new opportunity more is lying with cooperation with Nordic countries and participation in broader Nordic collaboration one way or another. And even the crisis itself in Europe, which has enlightened the Southern Europe problems, is providing an opportunity to our region, which is doing much better than itself. And I think that this is very, very valid and important moment also. What I found out here is that this model N and B8 is already working on a political level still. Foreign policy level, some particular level, political first of all level, but it doesn't work actually in economical. In economical level, it's still ahead, and how to implement it in an economical level is a challenge. It was also mentioned that actually having this specialized strategy, European strategy towards the region, we have to be focused, because like Tunne Kelam put it, we have 20 priority areas spread around the region, and they have tendency to become a usual shopping list, a national shopping list, but how to make them for the synergy purposes of the region, this is a challenge. I think that the Russian issue, we touched Kaliningrad, but we also slightly touched the general Russian issue, and there is a strong doubt that that this good ideas won't live as good as we anticipate because of the developments in Russia itself, not in the region, neighboring region. No problems with that. We have some problems with Tallinn, but generally speaking, it's doing well still. But the general political reasoning is a bit doubtful. And at the same time, it's a big opportunity as well. And if Russia will change the course of the politics and will pick up these advantages of the collaboration here, instead of certain geopolitical gains, I think that it will be for the mutual benefit of all parties involved. And this is something which is very, very important issue for the future. If we look at the economic aspects, we have to admit that we do not have only similarities but also differences. And these differences are also sometimes making big differences in actual practical cases. But fact is that we have common interests anyway. For whatever scenario, for whatever cases, we need a cooperation, for example, in infrastructure projects, no doubt about that. We have to fight together protectionist tendencies because there is no chance that by one we can do it. Not because of the smallness, but because of the general positioning of ours. And also we have to work hard on this new perspectives of global scale and shift to the Pacific Basin, and the Asian strategy should be coordinated and utilized in the best way, because actually it's already happening. Even our small Baltic companies have already some interest in Asia, but Scandinavian countries, it's no big secret. They are well doing it there. And being a part of the food chain of capital goods supply via Germany, actually, they are very heavily involved in Asian markets already. And we are exporting to Finland, but actually at the end, the end product will end up somewhere in Chinese production factories. So this is something which we have to elaborate more and actually improve more than it has been so far. We've been more considering it in the way of bilateral relationship than or triple relationship, but not in broader sense. And finally, as Baltic countries are too small to change big picture, we have to combine our efforts, collaborate, and why not to see it like one of Estonian economists have put it, Ardo Pailo from Setback. The region, if we look at this region, could be considered as a South Korea of Europe. Because if you look at the size of the economy around the region, including Scandinavian, by the way, it's about the size of South Korean economy. If you look at the population numbers, they are comparable. So basically, why not? There is a chance. So, and now I thank all our panelists